I recorded this whole video at first without my mic being on, so fuck me, let's do it again. To start this video, I think Alex Jones is a terrible person and a complete lunatic who says things, many of which I will never ever get behind and will actively make fun of. Some people will believe these things though and act on those beliefs. When Alex Jones said that the parents of Sandy Hook were crisis actors, people continued to dox and harass those people. Who do we blame for this? Keep in mind, people don't own concepts. Do we blame Alex Jones for being the one to make those ideas more readily available? Or do we blame the people who attach themselves to those ideas and act on them? Recently, Alex Jones was removed from all major social media platforms minus Twitter. What precedent does this set? What does this mean for the rest of us who might have controversial opinions? I'll talk about all these things in this video, and do a couple thought experiments in the process. Let's get into it. First of all, Apple, Facebook, YouTube, etc. These are all privately owned companies. Freedom of speech isn't required of them, sadly. I would argue that total freedom of speech would make these social platforms more free and therefore more healthy for the public consciousness, which, let's be honest, these companies have total control over, or at least a substantial influence over, but that's not how these big corporations feel. They feel they're in a position where they're obligated to make ideas as appropriate and inoffensive as possible, even if that means freedom of speech is gutted in the process, effectively making them social engineers. Now, I believe this is done with good intentions, the banning of Alex Jones, if it isn't done to please advertisers, and I agree with the idea that yes, he is a lunatic and his ideas are terrible. But who are you, from a principled perspective, to decide for your consumers that they're better without ever being exposed to those awful ideas and trying to control what they see on the basis of that? Well, in order to do that, your ego needs to be screaming in the name of self-righteousness and virtue. And as they say, some of the most abhorrent crimes are committed with good intentions. And both sides of this issue believe to have good intentions. What we have now is a formula that could equate to, well, nothing good. After all, InfoWars believes World War III would be fought with information, not weapons, hence the name InfoWars, and they're getting backed into a corner. Let's play the blame game, as well as construct a little thought experiment to answer a couple related fundamental questions. Who do we blame if Alex Jones's fanbase acts irrationally? Alex Jones or YouTube? Well, on one hand, we have a man who conveys ideas that resonate with a particular type of person, essentially grouping them all up into one big nest-like community. And you have, on the other hand, a big corporate entity smacking that nest with a stick. Or more appropriately, a banhammer. It also doesn't help that that community already doesn't like the corporate entity. Well, again, now that we've laid out the problem, who do we blame for the potential wrongdoing that may occur, if any at all does? Well, it's hard to answer, because both entities have their own agendas, so let's break it down even further. What kind of values does the community of InfoWars hold? Well, the mainstream media would say they are a bunch of crazies and alt-righters, in other words, subhumans, who don't deserve to share their ideas because they are a potential danger to society. That's the idea the corporate society are inclined to believe with their collectivist principles. Who are the people that compose the community of InfoWars really? Well, giving them the same human decency I give to everyone else, whether or not I disagree with them, I'd assume they vary in personality and ideology widely, with a few shared values amongst the group leaning a bit to the right on average. I'm sure there are some very far-right lunatics in there too, but InfoWars never struck me as far-right, just far-fetched. But to any modern left-wing individual, people that lean a bit to the right of collectivism and Marxism are Nazis, as the definition of being left-wing has seen a drastic shift in composure very quickly. But anyway, the few far-right lunatics that are sure to be present in Alex Jones's community are the ones to be noted here. They also believe they are in a kind of war fought with information. The fear here being, if they think they're fighting with information, what happens when they run out of that information? They can still share their information on their own side, of course, mind you, but they see YouTube banning them as a full-fledged assault, and in a way, it kind of is, and not just on InfoWars. Now that we have a basic idea of what the InfoWars community is likely to be, let's think about YouTube. Well, they're the biggest video sharing platform on the planet. Their influence on the public consciousness is unmatched. From their algorithm, they have a tendency to dislike people who aren't politically correct and are more than eager to take swift action against them if given the opportunity under the guise of hate speech and fake news, which is nothing more than the result of a trend that has been observed by most people on the planet, and is the same trend that got Donald Trump elected. That trend being an attack on traditional Western values. As a result of this mindset, it's been rumored they've made right-wing videos statistically less likely to be viewed, which I believe to be true in one way or another, as they are a giant corporate entity with ties to other giant corporate entities. They are owned by Google, after all. A PC culture would be natural for them to develop. Very dangerous entity indeed, with a dangerous ideology. Lots of power in the hands of advertisers and YouTube. But they still are a private company owned by Google, so not much can be done right now to rid them of how much power they have. Hopefully, something can legally be done in the future, or another, better alternative arises. So we have two entities worth worrying about here. Them clashing is the last thing we want, because it could be bad for everybody. YouTube taking down his channel is bad for a number of reasons. One being that it sets a scary precedent. If they can get rid of Alex Jones, a source of news media, on the basis of hate speech, who else could they get rid of? Well, they could get rid of anyone they disagree with if they so pleased. After all, getting rid of a whole news organization is the hardest part. This might actually be more likely than you may like to believe. If advertisers want it, it will happen. They are a privately owned company, yes, but ultimately they're owned by advertisers. Alex Jones is a problem to the corporate media, aka big advertisers, so this was very predictable. Another, more obvious reason YouTube shouldn't have banned InfoWars is they might provoke his more devout and enthusiastic fan base. I'm not saying YouTube would be responsible for anything another person would do, just that this would be the thing that would set those kind of events into motion. There could be protests, or something like that. I would hope it's just protests. But who's to blame in that event? YouTube or Alex Jones? Well, it's kind of a trick question. You might be eager to say, well, YouTube is to blame, or Alex Jones, obviously, but it's a bit more complex. The answer is actually both, and neither, because while both entities would be responsible for stacking the cards up, it would ultimately boil down to the people deciding to act on those things that would have to be held responsible for their actions. But still, we can recognize that this was a recipe for disaster from the start. Anyway, let's move away from the blame game and onto something else. I'm actually more angry at YouTube than anything. Who's next? Sargon of Akkad? Fox News? Secure Team 10? PewDiePie? I know it's been thought about to ban those people. The mainstream media hates their guts. A lot of their ideas seem to be offensive or blasphemous to the ever more common far left. It's the same principle of being so confident with your definitions and labels of people that got Alex Jones banned that could take these guys out. This is the precedent you set when you start banning people over things you deem unacceptable. All these higher-ups just need to be humbled if this was just a result of having better judgment. Realize that the human mind functions on the basis of defining all their stimuli, and with the world from our perspective being a series of definitions conjured by our own interpretations of what we're exposed to, we just don't have the hardware to come even remotely close to reality with our definitions. So why have you the audacity to decide what's best for people to expose themselves to if you have the same hardware as us? You don't know what's best for the public. This made even more evident by your recent actions. Reality is beyond your grasp, just as it is for the rest of us. And the more you try to grab it and control it, the more it will struggle to escape and lash out. So back to a question I asked in the beginning of this video. This is a question a lot of the left seems to be confused with, as they run into it quite often when trying to tell people how they're Nazis and such. When people are influenced by ideas with their actions, does that make the person they learned them from responsible? In other words, when a crazed YouTube fan of one channel goes on to shit-talk another YouTuber from another channel, despite the initial YouTuber not inciting it, is the initial YouTuber in the wrong? A lot of people from a very far left social engineering mindset would say, yes, it is the initial YouTuber's responsibility as a community leader to create an environment in which the people who immerse themselves in it are tame and obedient. They may use more squirrely words, but that's the principle aligned with the yes answer to that question, which is scary because YouTube and all these big corporate entities with all this influence over the public consciousness are itching to say yes to that question. It's them scratching that itch that just got Alex Jones banned. But the healthy answer to that question is no, because it is ridiculous to believe that a YouTuber control anyone's actions, let alone have the ability to do so. Ultimately, aligning with the concept of free will, it is the fan's responsibility to stay civil, and the fan should be the target of shame if he does not. In response to this, the social engineer would say, but if you truly believe and you are convinced that this other YouTuber is the scum of the earth, then you attack them. And in doing so, the social engineer reveals something ugly about themselves. With that response, they are conveying the message that they themselves lack the concession of personal responsibility and free will. So fundamentally, you two will continue to disagree, and the conversation will not progress until you convince them that individuality ranks higher in value than groupthink collectivism. So, when someone does something bad in the name of someone else who does not incite such actions but conjured up the ideas the action was fueled by, is that person responsible for the actions of the other just because they made the ideas the action was the basis of more readily available? The answer is no, unless the person who was making the ideas readily available was saying something as drastic as, people need to be hurt, or something along those lines. In cases like those, that's incitement of violence, and should be taken care of according to the current laws in place. I would not call that social engineering, I would call it a crime. A critic of this video might say, well, how can you say people shouldn't be held responsible when their ideas influence others indirectly to commit wrongdoings, and then also say YouTube is in the wrong for banning Alex Jones, knowing full well that Alex Jones has a devout fan base that might act irrationally in response? And to answer, I would say, well, I don't think YouTube is responsible for the potential wrongdoings of Alex Jones's irrational fan base. I think when it comes down to it, the followers themselves are responsible. I merely think that, ironically, in YouTube's attempt to fix a problem using a collectivist principle, that this principle manifests itself to be equally applicable to YouTube. Notice how slippery this is. We've gone from blaming Alex Jones for the acts of his followers to blaming YouTube for Alex's followers. This is just a silly game that could go on forever, and it ends when you take into account personal responsibility and ditch the collectivist mindset. Boom. Collectivist mindset destroyed. Because after all, people are individuals with individual thoughts and individual responsibility. It's very hard to believe when you're too pitiful to take responsibility for anything. The reason I even ask the question I've just covered is because I believe there is an intimacy between the concept of Alex Jones being banned and the mindset it would take to answer yes to that question. That intimacy being the attempted virtuous justification for trying to control people via a collectivist mindset. This is a concept I've played around with quite a lot in my head, and vocalizing it was very satisfying. This is a complicated issue, so if anyone disagrees or has anything to add, tell me in the comments. This has been PsychicSploob. Peace out. I really hope this recorded this time, because I am fucking dizzy for talking so much.